Modern art was a period of massive artistic revolution that emerged in Europe from the late 1800s to the mid-1900s. Modernism was very much a product of what was happening socially and politically during that time. A big part of this was the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution was a time in which inventors were really inventing. Machines mostly, farming machines, textile machines, transport. This led to more jobs, increased consumption, and an economic boom. And all this new technology was not like an everyday thing. Previous to the Industrial Revolution, technology had been progressing quite slowly. This new technology also led to the emergence of modern factories. People from the country fled into the areas surrounding these factories for work, creating urbanization. The middle class and bourgeois grew in size and power, and a new working class emerged. New modes of transport also meant people started to travel more and gain new ways of thinking. So what does this have to do with art? Okay, so let's first talk about money, because art is inextricably linked with money. As the middle class and bourgeoisie grew in size and wealth, their increased disposable income allowed them to both create and purchase art. This gave artists the freedom to explore personal subject matter and style. For many centuries, the church, the state, and the wealthy had been the primary patrons of art, and these groups mostly requested religious scenes, political historical scenes, and what I like to describe as wealth flex art. With their new freedom, artists became rebellious. They wanted to do away with old artistic traditions and create something new and innovative. They wanted to make art that truly reflected the changing world. While some art from the Modernist era reflects tremendous optimism about what these changes could do for society, other branches of modernism were critical of the changes, particularly those regarded as dehumanizing. While the economy boomed, this was also the age of worker exploitation, dangerous monotonous working conditions, and a move away from rural life into an urban one. Lastly, one can't really talk about modernism without talking about the wars. World War I took place during the period known as modernism, while World War II happened towards the end of modernism, partly ushering in the age of postmodernism. The social and emotional impact of the wars is a frequent theme of several modernist art movements. I'll explore this more as we go. So let's begin with a modernist origin story in realism. Realism is often regarded as either a precursor to modernism or the first modernist art movement because of the way in which it rejected traditional artistic conventions. So what did they reject? The idealized images and conceit of the academic art style which preceded them. These guys were having none of the filters. They were painting life as it was, raw, real, even ugly. They also rejected the ideas of what constituted worthy subject matter. They painted scenes of everyday life in all its gory detail and low-class or marginalized groups that had long been excluded from artistic representation. Realism was anti-institutional and non-conformist, and some of the artists in this movement would go out of their way to cause a scandal. Edouard Manet in particular used to create some very not safe for work paintings of everyday life in Paris and display them at a salon called Salon de Refusé, Salon of the Refused. The Impressionists came after the Realists, popping up in France around 1860. The big players were Claude Monet, the leader of the gang, Pierre-Auguste Renoir, Edgar Degas, Bertha Morisset, and Paul Cézanne. Impressionism is sometimes considered the first modernist art movement, and I would say there are three key reasons for this. One, stylistically, they really shook things up. The loose, short brushstrokes of Impressionism and the highly saturated and experimental use of color meant that the things they depicted looked a little abstracted. They didn't look exactly as they did in real life, but rather like an impression of the subject. This trend of abstraction in representation would become one of the defining characteristics of modernism. The second key reason is that their subject matter was unconventional and a little rebellious for the time period. They rejected the traditions of depicting important historical events, mythological scenes, or religion, and instead painted landscapes and scenes from everyday life. To us, this sounds incredibly tame, but back then it was a real affront to the French Academy. This brings us to the third point. The Impressionists rejected the official exhibitions and competitions organized by the French government and instead organized their own exhibitions. The public was scandalized. These rebels of the paintbrush were not deterred though and organized 7 further exhibitions held at intervals until 1886. Post-Impressionism. After the final Impressionist exhibition in 1886, artists started to experiment even more with colour and form, particularly for the purpose of representing the artist's emotions and perspective. This era has been dubbed Post-Impressionism. The main artists known to this era are Paul Cézanne, Paul Gauguin, Georges Seurat, and Vincent van Gogh. Cézanne is known for simplifying forms and shapes in a way that would later pave the way for Cubism. Gauguin is known for his emotive use of colour and symbolism, as well as being an ethically questionable person. Seurat is credited with pioneering the very cool technique of pointillism, and finally, Van Gogh is known for his vivid colours, emotive brushwork, his obsession with Gauguin, and his decision to consciously uncouple from his left ear. Fauvism. The word fauves literally translates as wild beasts. The term was coined by the art critic Louis Vaucella because of the bold, expressive, almost wild nature of the work. A key part of Fauvism was that they departed from the idea that an object had to be painted its actual colour. The object could be painted whatever colour the artist felt or saw it to be. If the trees look yellow to the artist, then painted a bright yellow they must be. The Fauves also continued the work of predecessors in simplifying shapes, often creating quite flat two-dimensional works. The most well-known Fauvist artist is Henri Matisse, and especially his iconic work, The Dance. Expressionism. Expressionism emerged around 1905 in various cities across Germany, a style which rejected bourgeois values and state-sponsored art academies in favor of a style which emphasized personal expression. They abstracted their forms in either simplified, exaggerated, or distorted ways and experimented with clashing colors and expressive brushstrokes. This was done to represent humans' internal, emotional, and spiritual world. It also came to be used as a vehicle for exploring the horrors of World War I and its aftermath. Cubism was founded by Pablo Picasso and Georges Braque. The two artists were close friends and collaborators in the development of the art style. Between 1907 and 1914, they would visit each other's studios daily, and even went as far as to dress alike. Braque described this period as like being roped together on a mountain. However, while Braque was known for being rational, reserved, and loyal to his wife, Picasso is remembered as having multiple affairs, and once voicing the problematic view, there are only two kinds of women, goddesses and doormats, an attitude you can see coming across in his art. Cubism was known for doing away with traditional perspective as inherited from the Renaissance, and instead rendering objects from multiple perspectives simultaneously. It also took inspiration from Cézanne in simplifying objects into simple, often geometric shapes, hence the name Cubism. Futurism. Okay, I'm going to prequel this by admitting I'm not a big fan of Futurism. The whole art movement is too violent and bloody-minded for my liking, but I will try to be as objective as possible. Futurism is an Italian art movement that was launched by the Italian poet Filippo Tommaso Marinetti in 1909 when he published his manifesto of Futurism on the front page of the Paris newspaper Le Figaro. Futurism was particularly modernist in its rejection of the past and all the art that came before. They were instead all about everything modern: technology, industry, energy, movement. You can see this in their depiction of modern technology and transport, particularly those of speed. Their glorification of industrial landscapes and a fixation on depicting objects in motion through blurring, repetition, and the use of lines of force. This one of the dog always gives me the giggles because it reminds me of the old Roadrunner clips. Anyway, back to my gripe. So Marinetti loved technology, encouraged war, was illiberal in his beliefs, and literally scorned women. In his original manifesto for Futurism, he wrote, "We will glorify war, the world's only hygiene, militarism, patriotism, the destructive gesture of freedom bringers, beautiful ideas worth dying for, and scorn for women." Thanks, buddy. Suprematism. By 1915, the Russian artist Kazimir Malevich founded the art movement known as Suprematism. Suprematism focused on completely abandoning representations of the real world, instead emphasizing compositions that conveyed pure feeling or perception. The movement reduced painting to its fundamental components: color, line, shape, and brushwork. It was one of the first abstract art movements and sought to distill abstraction to its most essential form, something Malevich referred to as art's 0 degree. This philosophy gave rise to his infamous black square and white paintings. Constructivism. In 1917, Russia saw the rise of another highly influential art movement, Constructivism. While it had aesthetic roots in suprematism, embracing basic colors, geometric shapes, and the concept of movement, it diverged significantly in its purpose. Constructivism was strongly aligned with the political ideology of Russia's communist revolution and was often used as a tool for propaganda, supporting the Soviet Union's cause. Unlike suprematism, it reintroduced elements of realistic representation, incorporating photography and film. It also extended beyond the visual arts into fields such as architecture, furniture design, ceramics, textiles, graphic design, advertising, and theatre set design. Because constructivism was trying to communicate with a working-class proletariat that were often lower in literacy, communicating ideas in a way that was simple and attention-grabbing was at the forefront. Dada art. Dada art originated in Switzerland in 1915. Dada art was characterized by absurdity, nonsense, a rejection of the conventions of art, and a hugely diverse range of art forms. Dada art can be credited with the invention of ready-mades, art which takes a pre-existing mass-produced object and recontextualizes it, elevating it to the status of art. A famous example of this is Marcel Duchamp's Fountain, 1917. They also introduced process of art making, which included chance and spontaneity. Dada art is often thought to be a critique of the atrocities and senselessness of World War I, and an attempt to deconstruct bourgeois nationalist values. Through the absurdity of the art, Dada artists commented on the absurdity of the war, modern life, and social structures. The style emerged around 1917 in the Netherlands. This movement responded to the war by attempting to build a utopian, universal language that would pave the way for a better future. The art movement moved into abstraction, utilizing the basic visual elements such as geometric forms and primary colors. The most well-known De Stijl artists are Theo van Doesburg and Piet Mondrian. The De Stijl style traversed multiple artistic fields, including industrial design and typography, but is seen as particularly influential on architecture. Bauhaus. Bauhaus was founded in Germany in 1919 by the architect Walter Gropius. Bauhaus aimed to combine art, craft, and technology. It was strongly linked to fields of design such as graphic design, interior design, industrial design, typography, and the aforementioned architecture. Bauhaus embraced mass production, championing the idea of products that were creative but also functional and economic in their production. The Bauhaus style featured simple geometric shapes such as rectangles and spheres, and often included rounded corners, undisguised materials, lack of ornamentation, and bright pops of color. Surrealism. Surrealism emerged in France in 1924 and lasted several decades. Surrealism sought to reject the oppressive rationalism of modern life through exploring the superior reality of the subconscious. The movement was strongly linked to psychoanalysis and particularly the psychoanalytical theories of Sigmund Freud. It sought to depict the subconscious mind and how this was reflected in dreams. The imagery seen in surrealism is often uncanny, strange, and dreamlike. One of the most famous surrealist artists is Salvador Dali, now known in equal measure for his art and iconic moustache. Abstract Expressionism. Abstract Expressionism developed in New York in the 1940s and 1950s. This movement embodied a large diversity of abstract styles, but they were unified in their aim to express profound concepts of the self and universal themes. They were strongly influenced by Surrealism's exploration of the subconscious, but represented it in abstract ways that were more befitting the post-World War II sense of anxiety and trauma. This often meant bold, gestural abstraction done on large, powerful canvases. Abstract Expressionism also marked the beginning of New York's ascension to the forefront of the art world. Some famous artists from the Abstract Expressionist movement were William de Kooning, Jackson Pollock, and Mark Rothko. So this has been modern art. Some honorable mentions of modern art movements not covered here include Symbolism, Art Nouveau, the Ashcan School, and Social Realism. That's it. We're done. Be free. Yay!